Thank you, Bante, for inviting me to share with your group. And today the topic I have been asked to share something about is what is Chan. Chan is the Chinese word for the more known word Zen. Zen is Japanese, and it's actually the same Chinese character with one Chinese and one Japanese pronunciation. And actually, in one word, what is Chan? Chan is just it. So Chan is not something that can be explained in words, but it's experience of our mind of awareness, our nature of awareness, the direct experience. And nevertheless, because that is for most people, that's very abstract, I will try to share a little bit in it and try to come closer to it in words so we can get some idea. But actually keep in mind that the words are just words, and like the finger pointing to the moon, and the finger itself is not the moon. The teachings in words, may it be my sharing, or may it be the whole Buddhist canon, is only words that can help us to get the direction right. When we look at the moon, we don't want to look at the finger. You don't hear me?
Yes, you're okay. Go ahead.
So when we look at the moon, we want to see the moon, and that is our direct experience of our true mind. And I'd like to start with the beginning of the Chan tradition in the sutras. That's from the Avatamsaka Sutra, and actually there's other Mahayana sutras that record the same event. There was one day in the later teachings of the Buddha that one day the Buddha was scheduled to give a talk, a Dharma talk, and many people were gathered in that area, and a deva, a heavenly being, made an offering of a beautiful flower to the Buddha before the Dharma talk started. And then everyone was ready, and people were curious about what is the topic for today. And then the Buddha sat there in the front, looking at this crowd of hundreds of people. And then he just picked up the flower, and that the deva offered, and he lifted up the flower, held it up like this, and didn't say a word. And then people were looking at the flower, and most of them were thinking, well, the Buddha will pick up some example having to do with the flower, and he will start talking soon. But the Buddha stayed silent. And then people in the audience, they were starting to think, what does it mean? Why is he picking up the flower? What is the story? What is the meaning behind it? And so the longer the Buddha stayed silent, the more restless and puzzled people in the audience got. Imagine you are sitting in a lecture, maybe at university, and you are waiting for the professor to start it, and then the professor just sits there and doesn't speak. And you imagine today's audience, what would happen? People maybe get restless, and if the professor doesn't talk for 5 minutes, people will start to take out their smartphones and will check their messages and do their own stuff. But at that time, there were no smartphones, so people were faced with their own restlessness and questions in their minds, and maybe boredom, and they were puzzled. But in the audience, like when we look at the minds of the people, the minds, they were full. They were full of their thoughts, their doubts, their restlessness. And so their monkey mind was very active. And in the audience, there was one person, one disciple of the Buddha, and that was the Venerable Mahakasyapa. And Mahakasyapa was one of the chief disciples of the Buddha, and he already had reached the fruit of arhatship. So when he was sitting there, he saw the Buddha lifting up the flower, but instead of looking outside at the flower and thinking outside what the Buddha is meaning and what's going on, he turned inwards, facing inwards, looking inwards at who is seeing the flower. Not what is the flower about, but who is seeing the flower. And by turning his awareness inwards, suddenly he had this realization. He broke through this question of who is seeing the flower, and he found it. He found the answer, and he smiled. And the Buddha saw him smiling in the audience, and there was a perfect communication between the enlightened mind of the Buddha and the enlightened mind of Mahakasyapa. And the Buddha then certified that Mahakasyapa was the first to get his whole heritage of the Dharma, and that this is what it was all about. And then the talk ended. And people still didn't understand what's going on. So there was this perfect communication between the enlightened mind of the Buddha and the enlightened mind of Mahakasyapa. And that what is happening there is what we call the beginning of the Chan or the Zen tradition. There's something happening without words, something that we cannot grasp with our intellect. There's something happening, and we call that the mind seal. The Buddha passed on the mind seal to his disciple Mahakasyapa. And in this way, Mahakasyapa was called the first Chan patriarch. And so the Buddha certified that Mahakasyapa, out of all these hundreds of disciples, and there were many who already reached the fruit of arhatship, they already were enlightened to the level of an arhat. Long ago, like in the very early teachings of the Buddha, many of his disciples reached arhatship. But in this moment, Mahakasyapa found something deeper. And what he found was his Buddha nature, his true mind. And that is what Chan is all about. It's about finding what is our true self. And when we call this true self, don't get confused. It doesn't mean there is a self. There is an entity there. Buddha talks about non-self, and that teaching of non-self, of course, is also very applicable in the Chan tradition. The Chan tradition doesn't go against any of the key teachings of the Buddha. But when we talk about true self, what we mean is pure mind. There are many words that try to describe something that is beyond words. We call that our Buddha nature, or our true mind, our pure mind. And this, or we call it the nature of awareness, 觉性. So what this is all about is that all of us, listening here to the talk, we all have this pure nature. We all have Buddha nature. We have this nature of awareness. And that is the most precious that we have. And this nature of awareness cannot be grasped. It's not located in our body. It's not located in our brain, it's also not located in our feelings or our thinking, but it is there. And we cannot grasp it. It's by nature empty. So it has the characteristic of emptiness. But it's not only empty, this true mind has miraculous function. This mind is limitless. It's not limited to our body. It's not limited to this room. It's not limited to this city. It's not limited to this planet Earth, but it's boundless. It's limitless, and it's beyond space and time. It's beyond birth and death. It was there before we were born, and it will be there after we die. So what is this? This is what we call the nature of awareness. And every one of us has this Buddha nature, this nature of awareness. And how can we find it? Once there was from the first patriarch Mahakasyapa, this teaching was passed on from master to disciple, one to the next, from one generation to the next. That means that each disciple who found it in themselves, who realized it thoroughly, not only a little glimpse of it, but thoroughly, totally penetrated it. Those were certified by the teacher before them. So the Buddha certified the Venerable Mahakasyapa, and the next one in the line who found it was the Venerable Ananda. He was the second Chan patriarch. So Venerable Mahakasyapa certified that Venerable Ananda found it. And so this certification went on from one to the next until the 28th patriarch, and that was Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma, maybe some of you know, was the Indian monk who brought this tradition from India to China. So Chan is not an invention of Chinese Buddhism, but Chan came from India via Bodhidharma to China. And before Bodhidharma arrived in China, he sent his disciples. And he was already well known in India. And one time, and he had actually many enlightened disciples who also found this mind. And so one time there was a king in India who was troubled by this thinking that what Bodhidharma was teaching. So, and he was actually not in favor of Buddhism at all. He was against Buddhism. And then Bodhidharma sent a disciple, and he had a discussion with the king, and he said to the king, "You also have Buddha nature." And then because he was very good at arguing, so discussion, debating. So they had a little debate, and then the king said, "So if I have Buddha nature, where is it? Where should it be? How can I know I have it?" And then the disciple of Bodhidharma said a very famous saying, and he said, "In your eyes, it's called seeing. In your ears, it's called hearing. In your nose, it's called smelling. In your tongue, it's called taste. In your hands, it's called grasping, and in your feet, it's called running. When you open it up, it covers the whole universe. When you collect it back, it is smaller than a speck of dust." So this is the description of our true mind, our nature of awareness. So where is it right now? It's here in us, the one that is listening to the talk. This very listening, the mind of listening, that is the clue to our true mind. Listening without thinking, without adding any thoughts, adding any judgments, any discrimination, any wandering thoughts. Just this pure listening, this awareness of knowing, this knowing of the teaching, this knowing of the voice. So this is the key to our Buddha nature. So now we can only feel, we try to feel into it. But when we go deeper, we can see that there is something very powerful there, and that this true mind is the source of our existence, is the source of the whole universe. And when we can tap into the source, the water will run without ending. So it's the key to really finding our state, overcoming birth and death. When we say in Buddhism, the goal is to overcome samsara. Samsara is birth and death. Samsara is suffering. But when we realize, we learn the teachings that the 5 skandhas, the body and the mental skandhas, are empty. And then we can realize emptiness. And when we realize emptiness, when we realize there's no ego, there's no self, we can overcome the physical birth and death of samsara. But that's not all. There's more. There's a deeper level, and that is the level of absolute awareness. And the Buddha, compared to an arhat, has reached this absolute awareness. And in the state, the Buddha is the one who is completely, perfectly enlightened to this level of awareness. And this enlightenment of a Buddha doesn't go away. So we all have this potential to become fully enlightened as a Buddha. And in this very lifetime, we can become a Buddha in our mind. When we realize this true mind in ourselves, we can directly tap into the source of no birth and no death. And that is what is Chan all about. So we want, in this lifetime, we want to realize this true mind. We want to find our pure mind. And this mind is not defiled by any impurities of any discrimination, or not defiled by the discrimination of like and dislike, not defiled by good or bad. It's always just such. So we call it also true suchness. It's just such. It's neither good nor bad. It's just such. When we can come back to that, we realize we have a lot of clarity. The mind is still, is unmoved by outside circumstances. The mind is unmoved by inner thoughts. There's no thoughts. There's just clarity. Unmoved means the mind is totally still. But on the other hand, the mind is totally aware and clear, crystal clear. It's the mind of knowing. And when it comes to the perfection of that mind in Buddhahood, that mind knows everything. That mind, when there is no thought, the mind cannot be found. There's nothing there. There's emptiness. But emptiness is only one side of that mind. The other side is this mind is bringing forth the whole universe. This mind encompasses all wholesome qualities, all virtues like happiness or joy, the pure joy that is not excited, calm joy, the qualities of compassion, the qualities of wisdom. All this is in our true mind. And when the mind gives rise to a thought, the mind can manifest something. So you have a thought, and with that thought, something can materialize. Maybe some of you already have this experience. When you practice more and your mind is normally more calm, then you can see it. How when you give rise to a thought, how it can happen that something in the world adjusts itself just the way you put your thought. And that's the power of mind. And now we can experience it a tiny, tiny little bit. Then you can imagine what this mind is capable of doing when your mind is truly calm, and when you are you have mastery over this mind, then everything becomes possible. We become the master of ourselves. We are not tossed around anymore by outside circumstances. No matter what happens, we are the master. We just return to this pure nature, to this true refuge where nobody can harm us, nothing can control us, nothing can harm us. No matter how the wind, the storm of this life is blowing around, we are totally clear that the outside world is just an illusion. We are totally clear that the outside world is caused by the mind, and everything is cause and effect. We have given rise to so many thoughts in the past. So now there is some result coming up, but we are aware that this is just temporary and this is not real. So we withdraw to this pure mind. And so in the Chan tradition, the teaching is all about how can we get to this pure mind? How can we find it? And so there's a lot of words from teachers, although the Buddha, also Mahakasyapa, in the very first moment when he experienced it, that he said that the Buddha said that this is a teaching that is beyond words and concepts. So that's sometimes a sentence that is used in the Chan tradition, and especially in the West, it gets maybe a little bit overused. But the teachings, I mean, it's when you have roots of wisdom, sharp roots, as we say it in Buddhism, you don't need so many words. You can experience it right away. When you see the Buddhas holding up the flower, you get it without words. That's easy. Yeah, it's very easy. But maybe the crowd, the most of the Buddha's disciples sat there and they didn't get it. So for that, those people, Buddha and also the later teachers, they had compassion for these many students who wouldn't get it right on the spot. So they gave the students some hints. They gave them some tools, how they can drop all the thoughts, how they can drop all the concepts and come right directly to this experience of their true nature. And maybe some of you have read some books of the Chan tradition, and you hear stories about Chan masters slapping disciples with a stick and the disciple getting enlightened, or others just shout and the disciple gets enlightened. All these are methods that you can only understand on the spot. So when you read the stories, it's not about the stick. It's about the moment when it happens, that this disciple is so shocked in this moment that he forgets all his thoughts. And in that moment, he can experience the mind without thought. And that is the intention of the teachers. So it's not about the stories. We don't need to think about and analyze the stories. What we can do when we read those Chan or Zen stories is we just try to take the role of the disciple and try to experience to imagine we are the disciple and experience the teaching directly, as if we were directly interacting with the Zen master. And then we have a chance to also drop our mind, to feel into it. Well, feel also is not the right word, because it's not something that you feel as an emotion or something. Yeah, so I'd like to share a few more stories just to illustrate this way of experiencing and the way of teaching. When Bodhidharma came to China, and he first met an emperor, Liang Wudi, and the emperor was he was a very pious Buddhist, and he built many monasteries from the state money, and he had many scriptures copied, and he was actually the one who made the law that all Buddhist monks and nuns have to be vegetarian, which is what has been practiced until today, that in Chinese Buddhism, all monks and nuns and actually many, many lay Buddhists are vegetarian. And that law was very helpful, because then the lay people knew that the monks and the nuns follow the Mahayana teachings, in which the Buddha had said that we should not eat other animals. So the law protected the monks who were receiving offerings from lay people to come into the situation that they might be in the dilemma of accepting food that is not vegetarian because it's been offered by lay people. So by making this law, the lay people knew now they can only offer vegetarian food to the monks. Well, that's on a side note. So when the king, the emperor, heard that there was a well-known old monk coming all the way from the west, which was very rare and a very difficult travel. It took Bodhidharma 3 years to come to China by boat, because of the winds. They had to pause many months in some places. So he came to China, and the emperor sent someone to greet him and to invite him to the palace. And Bodhidharma thought, oh, that is an emperor who's Buddhist, so maybe I try and he can support this way of Chan teaching. And he got to the emperor, and the emperor shared, oh, I've created, so I've built so many monasteries, and I supported so many monks and nuns, and I had so many scriptures copied. How many merits did I get? And Bodhidharma said, no merits. And then the emperor, because you know the basic teaching of Buddhism is when you support the 3 jewels, you make offerings to the 3 jewels, you create countless merits. So the emperor knew that, and he was like, how come? The monk says no merits. And then he asked, and later Bodhidharma said, the true merits are the virtues of someone whose mind is pure. And what you create here are just merits that bring you to heaven, and they have a beginning and an end. When they are used up, they are used up. But the true virtue is when you realize your mind beyond birth and death, and then you really, your mind becomes boundless. So then the emperor didn't understand, and he asked Bodhidharma, so who is standing in front of me? Basically, who are you? And Bodhidharma said, don't know. And then the emperor was totally puzzled, and Bodhidharma didn't want just to be put on a name and be judged. And so he said, don't know. And he left, and he realized that this kingdom was not ready for his teaching. So he went to the north, to the Shaolin monastery, and meditated in a cave next to the monastery for 9 years facing the wall. And occasionally he gave teachings, but very rarely. And in those 9 months, after 9 months, there was a monk who came, and his teacher had sent him to Bodhidharma to learn. And it was winter, and the disciple, the monk, he walked all the way in the winter, in the cold, to find this cave, and the cave was locked with a door, and he knocked at the door, and Bodhidharma didn't open. And then he stood in front of the cave because he thought, I already came all the way, I walked here for a few weeks, and I'm not ready to give up. I really want to find the true teachings. So he stood in front of the cave for one night, and it started to snow, and he didn't move. He just stood in the snow, and the next morning the snow was already up to his knees. Yeah, you can imagine he was really determined. And Bodhidharma also saw that he was determined, and in the end he let him in, and he accepted him as his disciple. And one day he said, the monk said, please, teacher, help me. And then he said, can you please calm my mind? So we all have this problem, I guess. When we meditate, we feel our mind is not calm and or peaceful. So he said to Bodhidharma, can you please calm or appease my mind? And Bodhidharma just said to him, okay, take it out, show it to me. So how can he do it? How can he take it out? And he stood there for a while and let this question sink in. And in the end, he said, I can't find it. How can you take out your mind? And in that moment, Bodhidharma told him, I already calmed your mind. And when he heard that sentence, he got it. He found it. He found this mind that has never been disturbed. This mind that is always in peace, at ease. And he found it, and he was enlightened. And so this was the first Chinese, real Chinese Zen master. So Bodhidharma is regarded as the first Chinese patriarch, and his disciple was Master Huike, and he was the second patriarch in the Chan tradition. So from this you can just get a glimpse. There's not much teaching about, not like me, like talking here for already 40 minutes, but it's just the direct experience. And so many teachers, they had their own style of helping the students to come to this direct experience of their true nature, of their nature of awareness. And now I want to come to just share another story of another Zen master, Deng Yinfeng. And this teacher, this master, Zen master, when he also was a Zen or Chan student, and he went to many masters. He lived in the 9th century, and in that is the Chinese Tang dynasty. And in the Tang dynasty, there were actually many enlightened masters in China. And so the disciples, the Chan students, they had the choice to find the teacher that is really kind of matching his needs. And so there was a lot of movement of monks wandering from one monastery to the next, from one teacher to the next, and then they got a teaching, and when they were lucky, they got it, and if not, they would stay for a while, practice for a while, or maybe wander off to another Zen master, Chan master. So this teacher, master monk, he stayed at Master Mazu and wanted to go to another master, to Master Shito. And so he departed. He said goodbye to Master Mazu, and he said, "So where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to Master Shito." And Shito means stone, Master Stone. And then Master Mazu said to him, "The stone path is slippery." And then the monk said, "Oh, I don't worry, I have my stick. And when the road gets slippery, I just play with my stick." And so he went off and he came to Master Stone and Master Shito, and he said, when he greeted him, he went around and he greeted him, and then he said he came in and he had a little like way of Chan stylish monk, and he just came in and said, "So what's the principle?" And Master Shito just said something and he couldn't understand. And so he went back and he didn't know what to answer. And he got stuck, and then Master Stone just said one word, and then he went back and then he told Master Mazu. And Master Mazu said, "Okay, when he go there again, and then when he says something again, you answer shh." And so he went again full of hope and advice of his teacher, and he asked again his question, "So what's the principle?" And then the Master Stone answered shh. So he took away his trick before he could even use it. And then the monk was puzzled, and he didn't know what to answer, and he went back to Master Mazu and he said, "You see, I told you the road is slippery." And this is a kind of way of how the teacher and students, how they interact. It doesn't make sense when we look at it, but it makes sense when we look at the minds of the people. So anyway, the monk got enlightened in his process, and the Chan tradition is very lively. When there's enlightened monks meeting each other, or monks who have a little feeling, maybe they have a little experience, they meet other monks, it can be very lively and very light. It's very light. And so he was at one other master's place, and the master was digging the ground with a shovel, and Master Deng Yinfeng, he was standing there with his hands on the hips and watching the other one digging the ground and digging into the grass. And then the other master, who was also enlightened, he took the shovel and threw it over to him, And so the way that the shovel dug out a piece of grass just in front of him. So, and then the monk, he said, oh, you only know how to do this, but you don't know how to do that. And then the other one picked up the shovel. The monk grabbed the shovel, and then the other said, oh, you only know how to do that, and you don't know how to do this. So this is also a kind of a small story about how they play. It's like playing with each other. And the same monk got to another Chan master, and again they were, like you can see from, they were digging, like when you read behind, you just observe not the masters, but what they were doing. They were also working in the monasteries. So they don't just sit there and meditate all day long, but the Chan practice is very alive. It's happening. The true mind is not confined to sitting or activity. And the true mind goes beyond the duality of stillness and activity, beyond all kinds of duality, even beyond the duality of samsara and nirvana. There is a sentence in the sutra that says, samsara is nirvana, or samsara is bodhi. And that means that as long as you still have a duality, you still have a preference, you don't like samsara, but you like nirvana, then there's a duality. There's two things. There's something you dislike, there's something you like, you aim at. So all this is already still being caught up in concepts, caught up in likes and dislikes. And it may be very subtle in our minds and in the minds of practitioners. So here, this true mind, the pure awareness, goes beyond all these concepts. So there was this monk, and he was with another master, and they were working in the garden again, and he had a cart full of earth, and he was on the path, and the abbot of the monastery, he was also working in the garden, and he was just sitting on the ground, resting for a moment and stretching out his leg, and his leg was stretching over the path. The path is just a little path where you can, a tiny footpath. So the other one, the monk, came along and said, Master, please get your foot in, I'm passing. And the master said, I already extended. I am not going to call call something back. And so when they talk, then it's also, they use the situation, but they actually talk about their mind. So he's already out, his mind is extended to the whole universe. So he's not wanting to call it back, to confine it again. So the monk answered, I'm already advancing, I'm not going back. And then he just continued with his cart, heavy with earth on it, and he just drove the cart over the leg of his teacher, and the leg was hurt. So this is Chan in a very extreme way, but also where the teacher and the master, it's not about the body, it's only about the communication between the two true minds. And so he accepted that his body was hurt, And after he drove over that and squeezed his leg, his leg was hurt. He got up and he limped back to his room. And in the evening, he came to the lecture hall with an axe, and he said, "The one who hurt my leg, come out here." And he has his axe in his hand and makes a movement to kill him. And then the monk came out totally free, and he stretched his neck to the master, ready to be killed, to be beheaded. And then the master put down the axe, and of course he didn't hurt him. But that's the way, they are already beyond birth and death. The body is only one manifestation of our mind. So it doesn't matter. Once you realize your true mind, it doesn't matter what happens with your body. And those examples, there are many in the Chan tradition, where you can see the lightness with which the people who experience this, they can deal with it. There's also masters who really were killed by bandits. There's one enlightened Zen master who was punished the death penalty, and because of some misunderstanding, and he was put in jail, and then he was killed. But he was totally calm, and he didn't defend himself. He was just accepting, and he meditated until his last minute. So this master, this Chan monk, he also became a disciple. There are not too many records on him, but there's one very interesting record that he, when he was, he wanted to go on a pilgrimage to Wutai Mount Wutai, which is one of the holy mountains in China, famous for Bodhisattva Manjushri. And so he wanted to walk to this mountain, and on the way he came across the government army fighting an army of bandits. So there was a zone of war where he came across, and he thought of, I need to do something. And what did he do? He just took his walking staff, and with his magic power, like a witch on a broom, he sat on his walking staff, and he flew up in the air, and he flew over this area of war where the two armies were fighting each other. And that effect that he had, I mean, imagine there's someone doing that. It's not a drone taxi or something, but a real monk flying up in the air. And they were so perplexed and so astonished, those soldiers, that they totally dropped their mind of fighting. And then in that moment, they stopped the war. And so this was a method how this Chan master actually stopped the war. That's a very interesting story, and it would be nice if there was a Chan master these days who could do something to stop the war just without words, just by doing something. But when he came down again to the earth, he realized that he was showing his magic power, and that this would maybe cause a lot of stir up among the people and cause a lot of stories and talks, and that he would cause a hype and people would run after him. So usually the Buddha also didn't allow the monks to use their magic power. Many monks had magic power, and the Buddha, of course, also had magic power, but he used it very rarely because he didn't want the hype of magic power. He wanted people to practice the teachings. So when this monk, he realized, okay, now I had to show my magic power. So the best thing is now to depart from the world. So he went to the monastery, to one of the monasteries on Wutai mountain, and he told people, okay, now I will be parting into nirvana. And he was very humorous. He said, I saw people passing while they were in sitting posture. I saw people passing and lying down. But have you heard of someone passing into nirvana while they were standing? And then someone told him, yes, I know of someone. And then he said, okay, do you know of anyone who passed into nirvana doing a handstand upside down? And nobody answered. So he just made a handstand. He stood upside down, and actually with his magic power, his clothes didn't fall down. So he was standing up and his clothes were all upwards, and he entered nirvana. And he just stayed there. His mind was in nirvana, and he stayed, and he didn't fall down. And people wanted to take him down, but they couldn't. He was just very fixed to the ground. And that was his last manifestation of his magic power. And then he had a sister who came along, who was a nun, his younger sister, and she also had a very good practice. So she saw him there, and she said to him, like as he was already in nirvana, but she said to him, when you were alive, you already didn't respect the rules and the law, and now you are already dead, and you are still confusing people. And then she laughed and she pushed him a little bit, and then he just fell over. And so she had the power to bring him down. But that is just the story of this monk. And it shows us that people who have realized their true mind, they do have a lot of special capacities, and that is not something very miraculous, but the miracle is our mind. So every one of us can do that. When we access this source of mind, we can directly become a Buddha in the here and in the now. The sixth patriarch, Master Huineng, in his platform sutra, his teachings, he had one very important sentence that goes, the nature, the Bodhi nature is by itself pure. We just need to use this very mind and become directly a Buddha. And this is a very important teaching that is there, that we all have Buddha nature, and that this nature is not defiled by our thoughts, not defiled by concepts, not defiled by duality. And this Buddha nature, that is our awareness. We just have to go back and dwell on this awareness. And that is the way to become a Buddha. When we realize our own Buddha nature, we already become a Buddha. Of course, when we say we become a Buddha, this is the Dharmakaya of the Buddha. That is our Buddha nature. The Dharmakaya is the Buddha mind. And so when we become this Dharmakaya awareness, then we can decide to come back or to enter nirvana, but we want to come back again and again as a bodhisattva until we finally reach a physical form of Buddha in his physical manifestation. But when we enter the mind of the Buddha, we already know what a Buddha is like. And so this Chan tradition only is about how we can understand our true mind. And the way is to drop all our thoughts, to drop all our concepts, to drop everything thoroughly. There's a saying, a sentence in the Surangama Sutra that is very useful also for the practice, and that says, Kuang Xin Dun Xie, Xie Ji Puti. When the crazy mind comes to a sudden stop, this exact stop is enlightenment. This stop is Bodhi. So this is a clue how to practice, how to come closer, to just drop all the thoughts every time and every moment. We can practice this in our daily life to try to be aware to, and when we see we have thoughts coming, we have judgments, we have likes and dislikes, then to just drop the thoughts. The thoughts are coming and going. The thoughts are birth and death. So if we really determine to overcome birth and death, we need to drop all the thoughts. And that is the way. That is the Chan way. So much now about the Chan tradition, and I hope that you can get a little bit of a feeling for it. And as I said, in the end, all these words are just fingers pointing to the moon, and everyone can only experience it by themselves. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Shifu. What a wonderful talk. So if anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand or write it down. And we're very fortunate to have Shifu here to answer some of our questions. So one here from Maya is, Shifu, how do koans fit into the tradition? So how about koans?
Yeah, koan. Koan is a Japanese word, and the Chinese word means gong an. And the translation of gong an is public story. So what a gong an is actually is those stories that I told you some, and the stories itself, they are there to give us a hint of what actually Chan is about, where to find our mind. That is the original use of the stories that were transmitted. But those koans have become a method, especially in the Japanese Zen and also in Korean Zen. They have been developed into a special meditation technique, but the technique itself has not much to do with the original koan. So that's why, so you can see it that goes too far to explain the technique of koan practice, but this is a technique that helps us also to drop our thoughts and to experience our nature. But it's not in all Chan teachings, and it's basically mostly practiced in Japanese and Korean Zen.
Okay, Shifu, we have another question here. Do thoughts have a duration? From Klaus.
Thoughts, of course, thoughts come and go, and thoughts are like they are very short. And when we think we have a thought about what do you want? We want to cook for dinner tonight, and we go on, and it's actually not one thought, but it's a series of many short thoughts. And so one thought is only one moment long. It's very short, but it's still, in a way, it has a duration because it comes and goes. So the thought is subject to birth and death, and of coming and going. I saw another question. Sorry, I cannot see it on my screen.
It says from Quran, what is the difference between Chinese Chan and Japanese Zen, or are they one and the same?
Well, the word is the same, and in the stories that you hear in the Japanese Zen tradition, they all, or most of them, happened in China, and they are stories of Chinese Chan masters. And what I just said, that because Zen went to, or the teaching went to Korea and to Japan, and certain teachers, they used their individual methods to teach their students to come to this result. So in Japan, Zen has developed, like the koan practice is a special development that was not only, but was very popular in Japanese Zen. And they also have shikantaza practice from the Dogen master, and so that practice is actually also practiced in Chinese Chan. And generally in the West now, or what is present day Chan and Zen, is that in Chinese Chan, the monks follow the Buddha's teaching. They follow the Vinaya, the monastic rules. So the monks, they receive the precepts. They are bhikshus. They receive the Bodhisattva precepts, and they strictly follow the Vinaya and the precepts. And many Chinese Chan practitioners also have very good knowledge of Vinaya and also of the basic Buddhist teachings. And in Japan, these days, the precepts have gone lost many centuries before. So the monks and also the lay practitioners, they don't practice the precepts. So the monks, they can get married. So the ordination of Japanese Zen monks is totally different, and you cannot really call that a regular ordination according to the Buddhist Vinaya. And that's a development that happened like a few hundred years ago, after Zen had already been established in Japan. So also the lay practitioners of Zen in Japanese Zen now, they don't know basics of the teachings of the Buddha. That's why some people say Zen is not real Buddhism. But of course, that depends on the individual, how much people learn then about the Buddha's teaching in general, like basic Buddhism.
Next question here, Shifu, is what kind of Buddhism existed before Chan? How was it different from Chan?
Well, actually, Chan, what is different is also, I mean, when you learn, I guess that most of you learn basic Buddhism, and that's what people also learned in China. They know about cause and effect, about karma. They know about making merits. They learn about that it takes many lifetimes to become a Buddha, and all these teachings, they already existed in China. Like Buddhism came to China in around Christ era, and around, and Chan came about the 6th century. So Buddhism was already present in China for 600 or 500 years. And then when Bodhidharma arrived, 500 years, when Bodhidharma arrived, he brought this teaching of directly experience your mind in this very lifetime. You don't have to wait for many lifetimes and practice the gradual teachings of first this step, then the next step. First you practice making merits, then you practice precepts, then you practice concentration, then you practice insight or wisdom. But in Chan, it's all on the spot. It's all the mind of the mind of the present moment. And so that's the difference. And these traditions, they still exist. So Chan is only is just one. Also in Chinese Buddhism, they have Pure Land Buddhism. They also have other traditions of Buddhism, and Chan is only one tradition of many.
Shifu, could you please say a few words on the practice of silent illumination?
Silent illumination is a practice, or the word is especially taught in Dharma Drum Monastery in Taiwan. And it goes back to one of the old enlightened Chan masters. And it's about also you just keep up your mind of awareness. You practice a meditation without object. And so that is not koan practice, and it's just a way of you keep your mind clear, alert, with no thoughts. That's basically it. It sounds very easy in words, but to do it, it's not so easy. So some teachers, they have some preparatory ways to introduce this method. But that goes too far here to go into that further.
Okay, Shifu. Another question here from Ezra. Ezra says, it seems that you believe in supernatural stuff, magic, incarnation, etc. How do you view the relation of Zen and Buddhism for people who don't believe in the supernatural?
Well, there's two things that you mentioned here. One is reincarnation, which definitely does not belong to supernatural power. Supernatural power is what we personally experience, and reincarnation is one of the basic teachings of the Buddha. And so the first one about reincarnation and karma is a key part of the Buddha's teaching, and it cannot just be omitted. Of course, you can practice meditation and you can calm your mind, but if you really, the goal of Buddhism is to overcome samsara, the realm of birth and death, and that applies also to the Chan or the Zen tradition. And in Japanese Zen, in the West, there's very little teaching on this. And they only talk about, you just sit, you practice your method, you just sit. but the goal of the sitting practice is that you experience those things eventually by yourself. And so they think there's no need in teaching you, because they think you will see it for yourself anyway when you become enlightened. And but in Chan, in the tradition, then it's very like those are the basic teachings of the Buddha. And maybe you heard of the famous enlightened Chan master Empty Cloud, who lived from the 1830s to the 1950s. So he's a real historic person of where we have photographs of, and very well known in China. And he also said, if you like, there's three important, very important points if you want to have the great breakthrough in your enlightenment. And the first is to deeply believe in karma and cause and effect. The second is to strictly follow the precepts. And the third is to experience your true nature. And those three together can lead to that thorough enlightenment, where you have that thorough breakthrough. Like in Zen, you can, what we call Satori experience is, we call it an enlightenment experience. When you use the method, you can have a glimpse of your pure mind when you are very concentrated. But this glimpse is not the end. That's only the very, very tiny beginning of the practice. So don't think when you get this glimpse that you're already there. And so it's about having this experience. You have to deepen it and you have to enlarge it so that you can keep up your mind in that state deeper, deeper, and truly understand yourself. And the more you understand, the more you keep up your mind, that when we come to magic power, that's a natural function of our mind that has nothing to do with belief. When you practice, you can experience part of that yourself. And the more you experience, the more you trust that what the Buddha told is true, because you already get a glimpse of this is happening. There is something happening. And that's not, we say magic power, but actually the mind itself is magic. The mind produces the whole universe. One thought has a tremendous impact. And once we understand that principle, we know how to be aware of each thought that we have. With each thought, we create our own world. And when we observe this principle clearly and our mind is more calm, we can see it, how it works. And you see it a tiny little bit, and then you practice more, you see more, and then you also, you become, it becomes easy for you to understand that what the Buddha or the ancient teachers are talking about is not just a legend or a storytelling, that this is reality. But when we have doubts, doubt is one main obstacle to the practice. Greed, anger, ignorance, doubt, pride, and wrong views. Those are the root kleshas to our minds that block us to have spiritual progress.
Shifu, so maybe just a couple more questions. Don't want to keep you too long. Is there still an authentic Chan tradition in modern China?
Yes, definitely. But of course it has changed because the Chan, it's each teacher has their style. And so there is monasteries that still practice the authentic Chan methods. And I don't know about now, but there, until recently, there were also enlightened Chan masters in China. And also my teacher in Taiwan, my master Wei Jue, was one of the enlightened Chan masters in Taiwan, and he was from mainland China. So there is still Chan practice around in these days.
Okay, and another question through YouTube: how can we keep up with your teachings if we want to hear more from your talks? Where can we follow you?
Well, I have a YouTube channel that is called Shifu Simplicity. There's a few talks on there, like there's a series of 6 talks on a text by Bodhidharma, which is classical Chan teaching. The channel is not very big, but you can also contact me. And we have our website is miaofa, miao-fa.de. That's our website, and there's also some things in English on it. And sometimes we also have monk chats in English, like question and answers. But of course, mainly the teachings here are in German.
Okay, so Shifu, I just want to really thank you so much for your time and being here to teach and share this Chan wisdom, Zen wisdom with all of us. I hope that you will be able to come back again sometime and give us more teachings. I know you're quite busy. And I also like to encourage everyone to learn about more of your teachings through your YouTube and your website. So I will make sure to share all of that in the description of the video on YouTube and also on the Discord, so everyone can have a chance to connect with you and follow you moving forward. Is there any final word of wisdom you'd like to share as we wrap up our gathering today?
Just remember to drop all your thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much, Shifu. Thank you. Guten Tag.
Thank you
Mitovo.
for inviting